Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. The Class 9 Soul Engineer, who thought he had just managed to escape from the jaws of death, was consumed by the intense purple gold light before he could even let out a scream. The few remaining defensive methods he had did not even stand a chance against this streak of purple gold light. How could Huo Yuhao's plan be complete without Tang Wutong's involvement? The dragon dance of the radiant sun was the final blow. The combined efforts of everyone helped slay a Class 9 Soul Engineer. After realizing he had attacked the wrong person, the Star Sky Doluo revealed an expression of grief and regret. His expression worsened when he saw how his companion perished under the dragon dance of the radiant sun. His eyes revealed a hint of hesitation. And right now, the soul tool installation he had feared was about to be attacked did not seem to be under any form of threat from the enemies. Yi Yulin immediately understood that they had been duped. The guiding flare was real, but the dark figure that followed after it was not any powerful offensive soul tool. It was a misjudgment he had made under the pressure of his circumstances. And because of his error, the soul tool front was not able to provide support fire. Just when Yi Yulin wanted to contact them again, a huge pressure started to act on him. A dark blue entity was heading towards him after forming an elegant parabolic flight path in the night sky. The speed at which the person was moving could only be achieved with the help of a Class 9 flying soul tool. Yi Yulin could no longer afford to ponder how his enemies were able to secure the help of such a powerful Class 9 soul engineer. He immediately turned and escaped without any hesitation. After releasing the Sun Moon Divine Needle twice in a row, he had expended a considerable amount of his soul power. On top of that, he had already witnessed the death of his companion with his own eyes. There were a total of 5 soul masters circling around him. Even though he was very egotistical, he was not foolish enough to think that he would be able to go up against 5 powerful opponents at the same time. Hence, he chose to flee without hesitating. After all, he also possessed a Class 9 flying soul tool. At this instant, streaks of light exploded in the distant sky. Following which, there seemed to be a mysterious wave which rippled through the air. Bastard! Yi Yulin was enraged to see those streaks of light. Of course he knew what those things were. Those soul cannon shells were not destructive. They were called interference shells. After exploding, they were able to release powerful interference waves, which could temporarily disable all communication and surveillance soul tools. Huo Yuhao's objective was apparent, because there were no surveillance soul tools near them. He was trying to cut off all communication between Yi Yulin and the other troops of the Sun Moon Empire. In fact, he had just been about to signal the soul tool front. Yi Yulin seemed to become increasingly frustrated with how events were unfolding. In fact, there was also a growing sense of fear in his heart. His enemy was somehow able to predict every single action he was about to make. Huo Yuhao always seemed to be one move ahead of him. Hence, he was not ready to become complacent. There was no point in trying to delay these enemies anymore. It was of the utmost importance for him to escape and save his own life. On the other side, the Class 9 Soul Engineer, who was facing Bei Bei, and the rest was also in a dangerous predicament. He made a few feints before releasing a series of powerful attacks to force them back. Following which, he also released his Class 9 flying soul tool and tried to flee. Of course, the path he chose to take fell within the effective radius of the interference shell. Huo Yuhao and the others pretended to chase after them for a short while before quickly returning to the protective soul barrier. After their short battle with the soul engineers, most of the heavy artillery had already retreated into the spectral demiplane. In this short amount of time, one of the soul engineers had fallen, while the other 2 had fled. It was truly an exciting battle for the higher-ups of Tang sect. Meanwhile, Huo Yuhao immediately focused his spiritual power to maintain the spectral gate, which had started to fade. Previously, the gate had been kept opened by Li Ya. Fortunately, Huo Yuhao returned just when she was about to run out of energy. After successfully exiting the area that the interference waves affected, the Soul Engineers immediately contacted the Soul Tool front. The Soul Tools began to charge their long-range weapons with energy, as they aimed at the linked defensive barrier where Huo Yuhao and the rest were. Right now, all of them were racing against time. There were more figures emerging from the Sun Moon Empire's palace, as they raced towards Huo Yuhao's position. Just as Huo Yuhao had expected, they were lucky that the Sun Moon Empire's Imperial Soul Engineer Legion was not around. If not, they would definitely not be able to flee. Meanwhile, a blinding white pillar of light surged into the sky from Radiant City. Its powerful glare instantly illuminated half of the entire city. The people who were closer to the white light felt as though day and night had been reversed. Just as his surroundings were illuminated by the white light, the faces of Huo Yuhao and his peers who had yet to retreat also became white. Huo Yuhao was instantly alerted by this powerful beam. Even though they were almost done with retreating, the Fourth Soul Engineer Legion and the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion was still not done yet. They needed a little more time. Even though they didn't know exactly how powerful the white light was because of how far away it was, Huo Yuhao knew that the white light was definitely released by whichever Soul Legion was defending Radiant City. They must have revved up their linked defensive Soul Tools in order to generate so much power. Even if it was done without the support of the high-energy compression array Soul Tools, its power was still not to be underestimated. The entire sky, along with its clouds, had turned white. Even though the white pillar at Radiant City had disappeared, the white color in the sky was becoming increasingly intense with every moment that passed. Huo Yuhao focused his gaze on the sky. There was a gigantic white ball of light, which was at least 100 meters wide, high up in the sky. It was following an incredible parabolic path, as it headed for him and the others. Shit! Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection had been feeding his peers with his observations. Hence, his companions were all able to see what he had seen. Shusansha immediately lowered his body without any hesitation, as he prepared to launch himself into the air. As the strongest defense-type Soul Master among Shrek's 7 monsters, Shusansha knew he had to be the one to block the ball. This was especially true, because he possessed both the Xuanwu shield and the Golden Tortoise spirit. Jiang Nannan became incredibly tense, as she prepared to soar into the air with him. She knew it was impossible to hold him back in such moments. Hence, she decided to join him instead. Hold up! Huo Yuhao flickered to their backs, as he placed his hands on their arms to stop them from flying up. Yuhao! Shusansha growled angrily at Huo Yuhao. In his eyes, this was not the time to hesitate. If they delayed their response, the entire team could be wiped out. There seems to be a problem with its aim. Huo Yuhao shouted. At this instant, the gigantic white ball was already descending from the sky. There was a trail of white smoke behind it as it raced towards the group. Even though it was not moving very quickly, it exerted a frightening amount of pressure on everyone, including those who were under the linked defensive barrier. It only took a few seconds before the ball fully descended from the sky and landed heavily at a place roughly 200 meters away from their linked defensive barrier. The ground initially trembled lightly before the vibration's amplitude increased tremendously. Their vision started to blur, as the ground beneath them appeared to melt under the constant shockwaves rippling through the ground. The white shockwaves collided with the linked defensive barrier in an extremely violent fashion. Beep! 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 A deafening alarm started to ring. The linked defensive barrier was showing signs of crumbling under the immense pressure from the shockwaves. At this instant, the Fourth Soul Engineer Legion was almost done with their retreat. Only the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion and Shrek's 7 monsters were still waiting in the barrier. Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion, listen to my orders. Get ready to launch our linked defensive Soul Tools. As for the rest of you, retreat. Eldest senior brother, leave with the rest of them. Huo Yuhao's voice echoed in everyone's ears. Bei Bei growled, no way. I'm the one in charge of the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion. You're the one who needs to leave first. Huo Yuhao immediately turned around to look at Bei Bei before speaking with a serious tone. Eldest senior brother, I will stay behind with Donga to lead the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion. Please trust me. I would never put my loved ones' lives in danger. There will only be hope for us to bring the entire Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion to safety if I stay behind. Trust me. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion is not in Radiant City right now. Having shared an intimate relationship all these years, Bei Bei was definitely able to understand what Huo Yuhao was hinting at. He looked at Huo Yuhao before saying, "We will wait for you then. Everyone, I need you to retreat with me." Following which, he waved his hand at his junior brothers and sisters as they charged through the Spectral Gate. At this instant, another streak of powerful white light was launched from Radiant City into the air. Once again, the blinding white light illuminated the city, as the frightening power reappeared within the linked defensive barrier. Everyone knew that the linked defensive barrier would definitely be unable to withstand another blow. It was no longer supported by any soul engineers, and its materials were not comparable to that of their enemies. The only reason why the previous attack missed was that they did not have any aerial surveillance soul tools to help them lock onto their target. It was merely launched with some primitive calculations done by a few Class 9 soul engineers. Since it only deviated from the target by 200 meters, this time around, they were not going to miss. Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion, follow me up into the sky. Huo Yuhao ordered as he pulled Wang Dong's hand and led their ascent. The Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion was the most powerful Soul Engineer Legion among the three legions. It not only had the best equipment, but also the strongest Soul Masters. They consisted only of Soul Masters with at least 6 rings. In fact, they were all direct disciples of the Masters within Shrek Academy. They not only revered Huo Yuhao greatly, but also idolized him. Previously, Huo Yuhao had already led them to countless victories. Hence, none of them hesitated when he gave them the order to fly. All of them started to ascend into the sky as they followed the directions given by Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection. After ascending into the sky, Huo Yuhao did not immediately evade the enemy's attack. He merely gazed at the gigantic ball of light, which was formed from the white pillar of light that surged up into the sky. Beneath the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion, the last few members of the 4th Soul Engineer Legion and the higher-ups of Tang Sect had entered the Spectral Gate. Prepare to fire the guided cannon. Every single Soul Engineer within the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion lined themselves up, as they placed a small yellow cannon on their shoulders. Take my position as the center. Fire at full power. Huo Yuhao placed a similarly small cannon on his shoulder. However, his cannon was golden. The golden beam of light that was blasted out of the cannon ascended only 30 meters before stopping in mid-air. A golden ball was formed rapidly at the tip of the golden beam of light. At this instant, the white ball which was fired from Radiant City had reached its maximum height, and was starting to fall towards them. 200 streaks of yellow light were subsequently fired in the next 2 seconds. They were not aimed at the white light of light. Instead, all of them landed on the ball that Huo Yuhao had fired. Huo Yuhao's eyes lit up, and the strength of his spiritual power was raised to its maximum. At the very next instant, the cannon on his shoulder vibrated and released a powerful golden pillar of light that had a diameter of more than 10 meters. The white light and the golden light seemed to instantly fuse in mid-air. While the golden beam seemed to pale in comparison to the gigantic ball of white light, it was somehow able to stop the ball in its tracks. Following which, a golden layer of light formed on the ball of white light. Upon seeing that, the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion cheered triumphantly. Huo Yuhao made a tossing action with his hand, and the ball of white light flew out far away, as it headed back towards Radiant City. Yes, this was the power of the guided cannon, one of the linked defensive soul tools that the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion possessed. These powerful cannons were usually used to handle top-tier stationary soul cannon shells fired by their enemies. However, this time around, Huo Yuhao used it to counter the enemy's linked defensive soul tool. Guided cannon shells did not possess any offensive power on their own. Instead, it used the most gentle and flexible of ways to counter the soul power in the enemy's attacks. It was only after the frightening ball of white light was sent towards Radiant City that Huo Yuhao was finally able to look at the damage beneath him. From high above, he was able to see the insane amount of destructive energy in the previous ball of white light that Radiant City had launched towards them. There was a huge crater, which was over 200 meters deep and 1,000 meters wide. Everything was gone except for a small patch of ground that Tang Sek's linked defensive barrier had protected. Let's go. Huo Yuhao waved his hand and brought the 200 Soul Engineers along with him. At the same time, the 18 spectral gates closed. Everything had gone according to his plan. After ascending high into the sky with the rest of the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion, Huo Yuhao and everyone else was finally out of the attacking range of Radiant City's Soul Tool deployment area. If he had chosen to retreat through the Spectral Gate earlier, he would most definitely not have been able to escape before the second ball of white light landed on them. Meanwhile, the biggest problem at Radiant City was that they didn't have a strong Soul Engineer Legion that could pursue Huo Yuhao and his team. Even though the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion was weaker than the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion, it was far superior to any normal Soul Engineer Legion. In addition, most of their aerial surveillance Soul tools had already been destroyed. Without any reconnaissance ability, they would not be able to go after Huo Yuhao and his team effectively. Hence, Huo Yuhao could convince Bei Bei to let him stay behind after mentioning how the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion was not present. This was because the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion could only retreat safely if Huo Yuhao were to stay behind with them. As the frightening ball of white light headed back towards the Radiant City, Huo Yuhao believed that its power could definitely rival that of a Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. The Soul Tool deployment area within Radiant City was also definitely one of the strongest deployment areas he had ever seen. If this toy were to land within the city. At this instant, another white pillar of light surged up into the sky in an inclined fashion. It shot towards the ball of white light that was heading for Radiant City. The ball was instantly hit by the white pillar. Boom! A loud explosion could be heard from all the way up in the sky. Once again, the entire sky turned a bright white. This time around, Radiant City was illuminated by the explosion. What a shame! Huo Yuhao sighed as he shook his head. They were still not able to deal a greater blow to Radiant City. However, after this blow, they now had enough time to retreat. Without any aerial surveillance soul tools to lock onto them, the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion was able to retreat rapidly without any threat from the Soul Tool deployment areas within Radiant City. However, it was still possible for them to be chased by high-level Soul Engineers. However, other than guiding the white ball away, the guided cannon shell would probably have deterred the stronger Soul Engineers from doing so. Even if the enemy was a high-level Class 9 Soul Engineer, or even the Death God Dolor herself, he or she would have to consider if his or her own abilities were sufficient to deal with a powerful Soul Engineer Legion, which was able to use linked defensive soul tools. Huo Yuhao held onto Tang Wutong as they increased their altitude. He had ordered their 200 Soul Engineers to fly into the distance, while both of them would sweep behind them. Huo Yuhao released his spiritual detection in all directions. He was keeping an eye on the situation in Radiant City. He wanted to make sure that no one was coming after them. The truth was that the frightening high-altitude collision earlier had released powerful shockwaves. Even though the position of the explosion was not within the interior of Radiant City, the shockwaves had pretty much made it impossible for anyone to fly out of the city. Even if someone wanted to go after them, he or she would be deterred for safety reasons. In addition, all the aerial surveillance soul tools that had just ascended into the sky were also destroyed by the big explosion. There was essentially nothing left of them. It would be near impossible for them to monitor Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's movements. It was only now that Huo Yuhao finally heaved a sigh of relief. Following which, he held Tang Wutong's hand as they chased after the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion ahead of them. After flying close to 50 kilometers, and making many deliberate turns to shake off any possible surveillance tools, or troops that might be following them, Huo Yuhao led all of them into a small forest. Even though he was struggling with his spiritual fatigue, he repeated the incantations to open the Spectral Gate. However, because he was spiritually incapable of opening 9 doors, he was only able to open 3 doors for them to enter with Li Yue's help. Following which, the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion, along with Tang Wutong and Huo Yuhao, streamed into the spectral demiplane. Even though they did not lose a single person in this huge battle, all of them were in dire need of a rest. The bright colors above the radiant city lasted for a good 10 minutes, before the sky started to darken again. However, the entire city had been consumed by mass hysteria. Even though there were not many civilian casualties, everyone, regardless of their status, was awakened by the huge commotion above their homes. Even though they were no longer asleep, none of them dared to leave their homes. Most of them were just looking at the events, which were unfolding from their windows. Hence, they were able to see the numerous mystical sights, which were happening in the sky above them. In addition, they heard plenty of frightening explosions. Most importantly, they witnessed a huge explosion in the direction of the palace. The closer a person stayed to the palace, the higher the status a person usually had. Even though the palace did not allow any high-level structures near its compound, the explosion was still visible from a distance. The sight of the scary Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell ripping through the palace's layers of defenses, before striking the core area of the palace startled everyone who managed to catch a glimpse of it. The palace was not just any other place within Radiant City. It was the core of the entire Sun Moon Empire. Even though Xu Tianran had just ascended the throne not too long ago, he was able to bring enormous progress to the entire empire, as he conquered a large part of the Heavenly Soul Empire. In fact, his reputation was sky-high after it was recently declared that the Heavenly Soul Empire had fallen into the hands of the Sun Moon Empire. He was already canonized as this generation's holy leader. However, his reputation would definitely take a huge hit due to what had just happened. In fact, no one knew whether their leader was even still alive. How could anyone sleep without knowing what was going on in the palace? It was bound to be a sleepless night for everyone within Radiant City. Countless alarms, explosive sounds and human voices could be heard everywhere within Radiant City. They were further worsened by the messy lights coming from different soul tools as fragments and shards fell from the sky. The world's #1 city had turned into a mess. The adverse impact that Huo Yuhao and his team had left on Radiant City far exceeded the actual destruction they had dealt. In the palace within Radiant City, Xu Tianran's face was as pale as death. Other than the rage and anger in his eyes, he pretty much resembled a dead man. This was probably his biggest setback since ascending the throne. Xu Tianran had never expected that he, an emperor of an empire with the strongest soul tools, would be directly attacked by soul tools from his very own palace. The stationary soul cannon shell had left a particularly deep impression on him. Its powerful penetrative ability was unparalleled by any of the Class 9 soul tools within the Sun Moon Empire. Even though its overall power was not invincibly strong, he would have guessed that that cannon shell was specially designed to counter the Sun Moon Empire's linked defensive barrier. Xu Tianran was certain that there was not a single linked defensive barrier in the palace which could have blocked that blow. In other words, if Huo Yuhao and his group had possessed a sufficient quantity of those shells, they would have been able to destroy the entire Sun Moon Empire. That was a scary prospect for him to think about. If that kind of stationary soul cannon shell was not invented by the Sun Moon Empire, it must have come from one of the 3 original empires. However, since when did they have the ability to manufacture such powerful soul tools? Yi Shishui, who was dressed in a long black robe, stood beside Xu Tianran. Because she was also staying within the palace, she was able to react immediately after the explosion. However, because she did not stay at the core area of the palace, she did not sustain any direct injuries from the explosion. She chose to stay behind to protect Xu Tianran, instead of going after the enemy, because there was nothing more important than the emperor's life. As Xu Tianran began to gain greater control over the empire, Yi Shishui realized that she was starting to lose control over him. His power was increasing steadily, and the Sun Moon Empire seemed to be a lot tougher than she had thought. However, under such circumstances, Yi Shishui could only allow the Holy Ghost Church to develop in this manner. At the end of the day, Xu Tianran was almost like her disciple, and was, at least for now, one of the most ardent supporters of the Holy Ghost Church within the royal family. It was crucial to protect his life right now, when the Sun Moon Empire was going to war with the other empires. If he were to somehow die during this time, there would be no guarantee that his successor would support the Holy Ghost Church in the same way. Yi Shishui had originally thought that she would be able to control everything. However, she had started to doubt herself. After witnessing the latest soul tools that the Sun Moon Empire was developing, she started to fear the powers they exhibited. She was also not confident of going up against the entire Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion. It was important to note that the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion only took orders from the Emperor himself. Hence, after weighing the pros and cons from several perspectives, Yi Shishui decided to fully support Xu Qianran. At the same time, she would try to figure out how to exert greater influence on the Sun Moon Empire. Thus, she did not go after Huo Yuhao and his group. Xu Qianran coughed loudly as he spat out a mouthful of blood. The servants by his side immediately handed him a clean towel too. Xu Qianran revealed a frustrated look on his face as he threw the towel aside angrily. Instead of using the towel, he wiped his mouth furiously with the back of his hand. Actually, Xu Qianran was extremely gifted in cultivation. However, his gifts were adversely affected after a very tragic incident. When he was younger, he lost his legs while trying to wrest the throne from his brothers. At that time, he lost a lot of blood and vitality. Because of this, he was only able to attain the rank of titled Doluor after using all sorts of top-tier medicinal herbs. However, his actual abilities were still a little short of a titled Doluor. Previously, when Dubuzi sacrificed his life to strike a deadly blow against him, Xu Qianran had sustained an extremely serious injury. Even though he had been undergoing therapies and all sorts of conditioning training, he was unable to fully recover from those injuries. Now, he was attacked by a Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. It was truly a series of unfortunate events for him. As his injuries piled up, the origins of his martial soul and spiritual power could only recover through protracted rest and conditioning. Even though he had tried to undergo therapies with the help of healing-type soul masters, the effects were not particularly promising. In addition, the loss of his 2 legs had burdened his body tremendously, and would delay any form of recovery. The imperial physician was afraid to tell him the truth. However, Yi Shishui had told him that even with the support of the best herbs in the entire world, he could at best live for another 50 years. Because he was currently about 40 to 50 years old, he could at most live to 100. This was simply too short for an emperor, who had attained the rank of titled Doluor. How could Xu Qianran be in a good mood under such circumstances? More figures started to appear by Xu Qianran's side. All of them were silent as they stood by him. It could be said that Radiant City had just suffered its biggest setback ever. In fact, it was even worse than the huge explosion in the underground ammunition depot. Even though that explosion had affected half of the city and resulted in civilian casualties and damages, it was ultimately an internal mistake. It was not because of Radiant City's inherent lack of defensive strength. This time round, the palace had been directly attacked. Their enemies were somehow able to penetrate their defenses and hurt the emperor directly. This was a huge blow to the soul engineers of the Sun Moon Empire. While Xu Qianran's body had to be fully supported by a chair, he did not show any signs of fatigue. He knew well enough that he must not allow his body to collapse at this important juncture. If not, the optimistic image he had just constructed would crumble. "Is the Prime Minister here?" Xu Qianran asked with a hoarse voice. "Your Majesty, I have just arrived." The Prime Minister appeared from behind as he bowed before Xu Qianran. It was apparent that he was panicking as he addressed him. Xu Qianran stared at him coldly before saying, "Is this the enemy you were referring to? The enemy who can change directions at top speed on the ocean?" The Prime Minister revealed a bitter expression as he replied, "I understand. It's my fault. You may stand by the side for now," Xu Qianran ordered coldly. The Prime Minister was no longer entitled to a seat. All the ministers rushed over at the first instant. It was not only an important moment to declare one's loyalty to Xu Qianran, but also to understand the emperor's situation. If Xu Qianran were truly dead after this attack, they would begin to hatch their own individual plans. The members of the royal family were the earliest to arrive. Even though the princes who had fought him for the throne had all died, it was not possible for Xu Qianran to put all their descendants and family members to death. That was something which the seniors in the royal family would never allow. If he were to really do that, he would anger some of the people who were eyeing his throne and spur them to act rashly. Hence, it was important to note that there was more than one person present who was hoping for Xu Qianran to die. Is the prince okay? Xu Qianran asked. A member of the Hall of Consecration quickly stepped forward before saying, the prince's palace was protected by the eternal star domain. Your Majesty, rest assured that all is well. Okay. Xu Qianran nodded. How could he not know that the prince was protected by a soul tool? The Eternal Star Domain was known as the strongest defensive soul tool in the entire Sun Moon Empire. It was supposed to be used to protect his quarters. However, since Juzi had left to campaign, Xu Qianran had placed the Eternal Star Domain with the prince to reassure her that the prince would be safe even when she was not around. Even though the Class 9 stationary soul cannon shell earlier was incredibly powerful, its power was insufficient to breach the defense of the Eternal Star Domain. Hence, the prince was naturally safe and sound. It was apparent that Xu Qianran had purposely asked that question in front of certain individuals, just so that those people could hear the answer and dismiss certain thoughts that were forming in their heads. After hearing how the prince was fine, there were some faces that were visibly disappointed. As long as the prince was still alive, even if Xu Qianran were to die, they would not have a chance of becoming the emperor. Xu Qianran seemed to reveal a mocking smile before he asked an old man beside him. Elder Kong, when is the Imperial Soul Engineer Legion returning? This man, who was addressed as Elder Kong, was a tall and burly man. He had short and spiky grey hair, and was wearing a yellow long robe. Such robes were supposed to be worn only by members of the royal family, though it was apparent from his surname that he did not belong to the royal family. All this while, he had been standing on the other side of Xu Qianran. His face revealed a calm and collected expression, as though he had nothing to do with what had just happened. However, if one were to pay close attention to him, one would notice the shapeless energy he was radiating, which formed a barrier over himself and Xu Qianran. It was almost as if he was his guardian. Elder Kong was, in fact, standing closer to Xu Qianran than Yi Shishui, and the aura he radiated did not pale significantly in comparison to hers. After hearing his words, Xu Qianran nodded gently before ordering, "Tell them it is my order that they track down our enemies at all costs." Is Elder Yi back? Your Majesty, I am here. Two people were walking very quickly towards the emperor from afar. It was illegal to fly above the palace. This rule still applied to anyone from the Hall of Consecration. Yi Yulin was in no better state than Xu Qianran. While Xu Qianran was heavily injured, Yi Yulin was very frustrated. During that humongous explosion earlier, he had been caught by the shockwave while he was in the air. Even though he tried to rapidly descend to avoid it, he still lost two precious defensive soul tools in his bid to keep himself alive. The energy storm in the air made it impossible for him to track the enemy's movements. He was only able to roughly make out the shape of several soul tools within the linked defensive barrier before he landed on the ground. Other than the soul tools, he could not tell how many people were inside the cloudy barrier. Elder Yi, who were those people? Have you found out who they are? Xu Qianran was surprisingly calm when he asked this question. Anger would only harm his already injured body even more. It was only appropriate for a great character to stay calm in critical moments like this. Yi Yulin spoke with a deep voice. Our enemies are very strong, and they are probably from the other three empires. If I'm not wrong, they have more than one Soul Engineer Legion. After Yi Yulin finished his sentence, the room went silent. They had more than one Soul Engineer Legion. What does this mean? It was still understandable if this attack was carried out by one or two individuals with the help of powerful soul tools. After all, there were bound to be people who could sneak past the Sun Moon Empire's aerial surveillance soul tools. However, something must be wrong if an entire legion could sneak past the surveillance soul tools. On top of that, more than one legion managed to sneak in. Yi Yulin continued, Your Majesty, I have already dispatched my people to investigate this matter. I would recommend that we stop our attacks temporarily. Our enemies might have retreated, but they have left some clues behind. Xu Qianran stares at Yulin before saying, I need you to tell me the details. I want to know more about these enemies. This video will end here.